This episode is proudly supported by Anchor Food Professionals, makers of mainland cheese. Here's Andy Sy from the Notting Hill Hotel.
We've been using them for a few years now, using their tasty and mozzarella cheese. We go through about 135 kilos a week at the moment. So a huge number. So we use it for our garlic bread, our pizzas, our parmas, our bechamel, our cheese sauce for our croquettes and arancini, throughout our lasagnas, anywhere we can really. It's such a good product. You know, having the freshest chips to your fresh chicken to a freshly crumbed schnitzel and topping up with a really high quality cheese is amazing.
For more information, go to anchorfoodprofessionals.com.
For me, the attraction of FoodBank is that I just can't help but feel this issue is, of all the issues we face as a society, hunger should not be one of them. It is 100% fixable.
Hey everyone, it's Dani Valent here, and this is Dirty Linen. Dirty Linen, 800 episodes and counting. We are committed to telling the happy food stories, but also the hard food stories. And I got to say, today is more the latter, though we are also going to find hope and reach towards solutions. My guest is Kylea Tink, the new CEO of FoodBank. Kylea was an MP in the previous term of Parliament, federal Parliament, but moved on to other things when an electoral redistribution erased her seat in North Sydney. She speaks to us as the new CEO of FoodBank upon the release of the 2025 Hunger Report, which is pretty devastating reading. It shares that 1 in 3 Australian households experienced food insecurity in the past 12 months, with renters, the disabled and single-parent households particularly vulnerable. It's a really tough read in the so-called lucky country. Kylea, welcome to Dirty Linen.
Hi, thanks for having me, Dani.
It's great to have you on the show. We do have some pretty tough things to talk about. What does the FoodBank Hunger Report tell us?
Yeah, in its 13th year, this year's Hunger Report is pretty dire, to be honest. And the results surprised us. We had honestly hoped to see an improvement in people's food insecurity around the country. But actually what it tells us is there's been little to no change in the overall numbers. As you said, 1 in 3 households in Australia are currently reporting that they're food insecure. But perhaps concerningly, what we're seeing is in specific demographics, so be that renters, single parents or households where there's somebody living with a disability or illness, the circumstances are worse than we had previously seen. So 7 out of 10 single parent families, 7 out of 10 households with somebody with an illness or a disability. And in that second group, 3/4 of those people are actually in the severe category, which, means they are literally going days without food or skipping meals just to get by in a week.
It's really devastating. I mean, can we put a human face to it? Like, what kinds of things might people be doing? Like, what does it look like between, in the privacy of a home?
Well, I think this is the thing that actually, as a new CEO to this organisation, really struck me. I mean, 1 in 3 households is quite literally your neighbour, or it's your sister who you may not have checked in on for a while. The stories we hear are of parents who are choosing to forego, breakfast for themselves to be able to put extra food on their kids' plates. There's stories of the students who are living in rental accommodation who are living on nothing but 2-minute noodles. Now, 2-minute noodles are great as a surprise food or a treat food, but they're not nutritionally sound for, 7 meals a night. And in the case of our pensioners, we're hearing, people who are older in our community are living on porridge for dinner. So people who are finding themselves in a food insecure environment are defaulting to what are typically high carb, not low nutritionally value products. So less fruit and veg, less high quality protein. And as a result, we've got people that got lower levels of energy and are potentially going to experience a higher level of acute or chronic health conditions in the longer run. So it's something we can't ignore. And I think, when you look at the efforts, particularly of our federal government in the last 3 years, they tried on a number of occasions to deliver cost of living relief in the form of energy rebates or support for housing. And I guess what this data shows us is that while that relief may have kept a roof over somebody's head or may have kept the lights on, it hasn't translated into food on people's tables. And, you know, I can't help but reflect on the fact the government is doing a lot of work at the moment investing in Medicare, which again is a great investment. But the truth of the matter is, unless we get this bit right, that Medicare investment is going to be exhausted because sicker people are going to be turning up in GP practices across the country simply because they're not having their nutritional needs met.
Yeah, it's it's just devastating. What sort of barriers are there for people in accessing some of the food that is available through FoodBank?
Yeah, we find, you know, the data showed us that we've now hit over 1 in 2 Australians know that there are food relief services available for them when they need them. But fascinatingly, less than 1 in 4 people who do need them will access those services. And it does appear that the single biggest barrier is stigma. You know, people worry about turning up at these sites. I think it's important that we all remember, you know, many of the people who find themselves in these situations are there intermittently. It's because a bill has come in that they weren't expecting. You know, it's the healthcare crisis, it's the childcare fee, it's the rates bill that just hadn't been budgeted for. And so Australians appear to have a mindset that makes it very difficult for them to dip in and out of these services when they require them. The other thing I find so typically Australian is that we found, you know, that more than 30% of the people in this cohort have a mindset that somebody else probably needs it more than them. So they're prepared to step back because they think there are other people out there that are in greater need. The message to try and get through to people is this is not a supply problem. You know, we grow and produce enough food in this country to feed our entire population 3 times over. This is a system problem, and we need to get more food into the social services system so that when people need to tap into it, they can, and people need to feel confident and comfortable in accessing those services. You know, it's interesting, I was reflecting, I met a general practitioner when I was in Canberra recently, and he made the comment that it's gotten to the point in his regional community that when a single mum walks through his door, he knows when he orders the blood test for them that she's going to be low in iron because he knows she's going to already have been compromising on protein intake.
Wow, it's really devastating. I mean, the choices that people make are so hard. You know, it really struck me in the report, you know, one story about a couple, they needed private health insurance because of the man's conditions. That was just a non-negotiable, but paying for the private health insurance meant they compromised on food and on keeping their house warm. And when you hear a story like that, you know, it's very different from the picture that some people might have of the person without secure housing who is standing on a street corner lining up at a soup van. These are people who are perhaps in employment, may even own their home, but it's just that the cost of living means that they can't complete the picture of a happy, healthy, sustained life.
Yeah, I mean, I think what is fascinating is that I do agree with you. I think there tends to be this mindset in Australia that food insecurity is something people associate with homelessness or, you know, some sort of massive social disruption. And it clearly is there. But what this report has shown us is hunger is mainstream in Australia now. You know, 1 in 5 households who earn more than $91,000 a year are reporting being food insecure on occasions. Now, you know, that's not a bad income. But what it does tell us is that people are they have this hierarchy of bills they need to cover. And number 1 is absolutely a roof over your head. That is the highest priority. Number 2 is your utilities. It's your services. And when you go through that, you know, then you've got health, then you've got schooling. And so food on your table is the thing that people are compromising on. And it's stubbornly persistent. This is an endemic issue now across our country. And when I reflect on it, I think it's taken its time to be brought really to a high profile position in terms of public awareness. We've spent a lot of time in the last 3 to 5 years talking about housing as being in crisis. We've spent a lot of time in this country talking about as energy prices being really high. But provision of food is something that's been quite silent. And I think Australians struggle to accept it. Even my own mum called me after we launched this report and said, Kylie, how can this be so? Is it honestly 1 in 3 households? And I was like, yeah, it is. This is the truth. And until we're able to name it, we can't deal with it. And so I think, that's why the release of this year's report is so important. Food security needs to be elevated in this country to a conversation that brings us all to the table.
So, Kylie, as you've mentioned, it's not a supply issue. We grow enough food to feed everybody and then some. We export a lot of food and we've got enough to do that as well. I love the way that you're sort of joining the dots and hoping to solve a couple of problems at the same time. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, so we've gone back to the government for a while now in this country. We've been advocating, along with other organisations like End Food Waste, for the government to find a way to make it easier for those who grow more than they need or those that produce more than they need to donate those products to services like FoodBank Australia and to be able to receive some sort of tax incentive for doing so. So the thing that just doesn't make sense about our current system is that if they're able to donate the money and get a tax deduction, if they choose to give us the food and incur the additional cost of providing that food to us, that is not a tax deduction. They just have to cop that cost on the chin. And as you know, and anyone listening to this podcast would know, our supply industry in this country at the moment has some of the lowest margins of any industry, and they are already doing a significant amount of the heavy lifting in this space. So I want to do a massive shout out to growers and manufacturers in this country for how they're working with organisations like FoodBank. If this is they don't not supply it because they're cold-hearted or, they just don't want to. In the case where it incurs an additional cost for a grower or a manufacturer, that's a hard ask for them. So we went to the Australian Federal Government just earlier this week, actually, and asked them to reconsider introducing a donation component for food subsidies. It's not a radical tax reform. This is something that happens in America and many other mature markets. Indeed, it's something that Treasurer Jim Chalmers had previously described before he was elected to government as sensible reform. Fascinatingly, last Parliament, we saw a Liberal senator moved a private member's bill, again advocating for it. So from our perspective, this has got bipartisan support. At the time it was moved last year, it got mixed up in an argument about whether large retailers needed any more tax incentives to operate. And it was quite an unfortunate situation because that wasn't what this bill was about. So we're taking the idea back to Canberra. We've suggested that they take comfort in moving forward by capping the size of the business that could claim a donation receipt like this, and even go so far as to cap what you're actually able to claim so that suppliers can only claim up to a certain dollar amount. It seems completely sensible. It's good for suppliers, tick. It's good for manufacturers, tick. It's good for families, tick. It'll cost the government only somewhere between $50 and $100 million, but the return is $2.3 billion. So tick. Great return on investment. And so we're really committed to, continuing to push the government around this one reform even in this coming 3 years. The second thing we're asking them to do is just acknowledge this problem is bigger than what they were aware of. We're not blaming them for it, but I think we're saying if you can acknowledge it and work with ourselves and others to provide us with a higher level of funding, we can help you fix it. We're giving them the benefit of the doubt that they were unaware. If they continue to not want to support us in the face of awareness, that's another issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much in what you've said. Like on the farm side of things, like farmers grow food because they want to feed people. It is heartbreaking for farmers to plough food into the ground or to dump it. It is not what they grow it for. And when, there's a whole other conversation we could have around mental health of farmers and just how demoralising it must be to put all the work into growing food and then to not get it to market. It's just not what they're there to do. So I think the feel good factor of knowing that your food is going to a better place, is doing what it's supposed to do. Nourishing Australians is has multiple benefits. The tax side of it, like, I'm certainly no tax expert. I know that our tax system is in need of great reform, and fiddling around the edges, if it's to the good, then great, let's do it. Kylea, you spent a term in Parliament as an independent MP. What did you learn about the way power and change work in this country?
Yeah, it was actually such a privilege to be able to go into Parliament as a normal person. I don't come from a political background. And as you said, I went in as an independent, so I wasn't aligned to either of the major parties. I sat in the area of the Parliament called the crossbench, which is this really unique position which you can work with anybody around the chamber to get stuff done. So it was a fascinating experience. And my key observation is that on many occasions, one of the key challenges is that the people who are making the decisions simply don't have the awareness that they need to have of the issue that is in hand. So if I can give an example, Tony Burke sought to move some really significant employment legislation reform in the last term. And that was great. There's no doubt we need to lift wages in this country. But one of the things he particularly wanted to do in the legislation, I could see as somebody who had previously owned or been a part owner in a recruitment agency, was going to be a disaster. It just wasn't going to be able to work if you were, for example, running temps. And so I went and saw him and sat down with himself and his chief advisor and just said, look, I just need to give you this real world experience. Like, your legislation would mean this if it proceeds. And to his credit, he listened to me, and then he turned to his advisor and went, is she right? And the advisor was like, well, yeah, she is, but we hadn't thought about that. And then he was prepared to go, okay, well, we need to fix that. That can't proceed. So there's no doubt that being an independent in that Parliament gave my voice an opportunity to add something to the debate. And I think that's what our Parliament needs. We need our MPs and our policymakers to be able to have robust conversations around what is the best way forward, and to not just sit in their camps of I'm for this or I'm against this, which is what has tended to be the case when you're just in a duopoly on both sides. So, it's why with this issue, we've taken this issue to government in this term. We've actually launched it into the Parliament via the crossbench, because we wanted to launch it as a non-politically aligned conversation. And, now we're working really hard with both the government and the opposition to say this should be beyond politics. This is a national issue for us. This is when we need the best of our Parliament to pull together to say, how do we address this?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's just a random bonus that you had run a recruitment agency and were able to point to that glitch. But, people, you're not going to have a random person from every arena to point out the holes in legislation. You just think, well, where is the consultation? And, the robust drafting of legislation that accounts for all its impacts. And I think also, Tony Burke is one minister, but they all do. They move around portfolios and they're not necessarily experts in a particular area, which is fine. They're perhaps experts in drafting or in negotiating or in listening, hopefully. But as you point out, like the politicisation of some of these issues that really should have broader support must be an impediment to getting things done.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, you just made a couple of really strong observations about when it works best. And I do think consultation is key. And I don't think, in my experience, this government does a great job of it and I don't know that that's necessarily 100% their fault. As a society, we have a real weakness in that we make it very difficult for organisations like politicians or our federal government to say, oh yeah, we got that wrong. so we're going to fix it. You know, the minute somebody says we got that wrong, there is such a pile on, you know, in terms of, you should have known better, blah, blah. We don't create an environment where incremental change is something we aspire to. I mean, in my personal life, I don't think I've ever got anything 100% right. So you always have to look for that marginal improvement. As a nation, we don't really allow our government to do that. We give them one chance to get it right. And because they're in that mindset, once they set that path, they will not deviate because they can't be seen to have gotten it wrong. And that's a real problem for us as a nation. You know, even in light of having raised this issue in the parliamentary environment, there's a sense that, you know, we may have gone on attack on the government in saying this is an issue. Now, we didn't. At no point did I say this was the government's fault. I'm not implying it's the government's fault now. And I 100% acknowledge the work that they did in the last term to try and provide cost of living relief in the areas that they targeted. What we're saying in this term is this just is the next issue, and we do need them to come to the table seriously and help us address it. What we don't want them to do is to throw their toys out of the cot and just say, you know, they don't want to talk to us because this issue makes them feel bad or look bad. That's in nobody's best interest.
Yeah, everything doesn't have to be a gotcha moment. And if you think about it, you know, like as more of a scientific approach, it's like when you have new data, you look for new solutions or ways of thinking about things. I think another problem with the political system as it stands, and even this concept of portfolios, is just the disconnection of all these things. Like you've drawn a connection between food waste and hunger, but that is not a connection that everyone draws. I mean, the reason that I love working as a food journalist, and I know I'll never get sick of it, is that you can put any lens across it. You know, politics, social justice, environment, supply chain, education, technology, like it's all there. And you just think you can... these things really do need to be dealt with systemically. So I love the fact that you're at least, like finding these links. But I also can imagine that the person that's dealing with, I don't know, health and health, hunger is different to the person dealing with tax. So you've got to get them in a room together and thinking about things from a broader perspective, which may not have political mileage. So good on you for trying, Kylie.
Well, look, if you know, you don't get anywhere without trying, And I think, again, what you've just offered is at the heart of it. You know, a systems issue requires a systems approach. And if you're just working your way through a list, you know, if the mindset at the moment is we've got to focus on housing, we've got to focus on housing, we've got to focus on housing, and tick it when we get it, we've got to focus on energy, we've got to focus on energy, we've got to focus on energy, tick. Of course you're going to have other things fall out of that system, you know. And for me, when I think about food insecurity, I mean, as we said, it connects with, you can't invest in Medicare and not expect to see that Medicare expense blow out if people aren't eating well. The other area, I mean, I don't have the data for it, but I'm sure it's connected, is violence within our community. You know, if you're living in a home environment where food is scarce and you're not sure how you're going to provide, I can only imagine the level of anxiety and emotional intent in that house. So, you know, you've got to, I would have to say, addressing hunger would go some way towards addressing violence in households. I think of problem gambling. You know, people are desperate to find a way out of here. What are they going to do? They're going to drop their last $10 on the nose of the horse that's running rather than go out and spend it on 5 apples for the kids. So it is all connected. And I really hope that as an activated citizenry, we can work with our government to try and encourage them to think differently about these things. It's not about a quick political win. We actually want true leadership and true reform across our society to take us to a better place as a nation. So, you know, hunger, I think of this, and the thing that's interesting, I had a journalist in Melbourne try and say to me that the report was unfounded because, on the other hand, we have, you know, one of the highest obesity rates that we've ever seen in the nation. His claim was that 40% of Australians are now obese. And he's going, doesn't that mean people can't be hungry and obese? And I'm like, of course they can. In fact, you would absolutely expect to see that, because what they can eat is nutritionally poor and probably going to add, you know, fat. It's not going to give you energy. And yet his whole thing was, well, I don't see emaciated people walking around. You know, I don't see them dragging their feet, no hollow cheeks. And I'm like, God help us if we ever do, because that's starvation. So the important thing about food insecurity is it's the canary in the coal mine. If it's not getting better, then you actually have a fundamental issue in your society. And we know it hasn't gotten better in the last few years. So we have to step into it. We can't ignore it.
Well, it also points to how important it is that you are changing ideas about what food insecurity looks like. And, you know, of course, it's about, like the accessibility of cheap fast food is a whole other problem. And I think also, you know, back to the systems issues, like, we do need housing, and there's been a focus on that, and rightly so, but we're also building housing on really good land for growing food. So, you know, everything is connected. And it's, Kylea, you've had such a varied and interesting career, and you're very new at FoodBank. You're only a few weeks in the role, so thanks for being across everything and answering all the hard questions. But what drew you to this work?
Yeah, it's actually day 10, if you can believe it. So technically it's day 10. You know, I think when I grew up in regional and rural Australia, so I'm a country girl at heart. Both my parents' families had come from the land. So working across our nation, you know, because then I've spent the better part of my life in urban areas, in metro areas. So I've always had a very strong sense of connection, no matter where you live. And I think for me, I've been fortunate that no matter where I've worked, I've been able to work with a really passionate and committed group of people who are prepared to try and do something differently. They've seen a problem and they want to tackle it differently. For me, the attraction of FoodBank is that I just can't help but feel this issue is, of all the issues we face as a society, hunger should not be one of them. It is 100% fixable. When you've got more supply and you've got a need, we just have to work out how to connect those two things. I mean, you know, food waste is undoubtedly part of it. I've learned since being in this role in Australia, we waste enough food to fill the MCG to its roof 9 times over every year. So if we can in some ways even just interject in that component of it, we can redirect that resource, we can reduce our carbon emissions. You know, there's so many elements of this that are fixable that it attracted me. You know, for a couple of my roles, I worked in the area of health, which was about providing greater support to people who were going through a really tough time in their lives, oftentimes facing a cancer diagnosis. And I admit I came out of those experiences incredibly proud of the work I did, but always feeling like I'd failed a little bit because I couldn't beat cancer. You know, there's still no answer to cancer. But for me, hunger, there's an answer to it. And so, you know, at this stage of my career and my life, I was like, this is something I want to lean into really hard, because we should be able to fix this. We're a big country, but we're not a big community. There's only 27 million of us. So if we actually put our shoulders to the wheel on this with determination, this can be overcome and we'd all be better for it. You know, well-fed people have higher levels of energy. They're more productive. We will be happier. We have a joke in my house. One of my daughters, when she gets hungry, she gets angry. So we talk about hanger as being, you know, an issue in her house. She can say, oh, she's hangry. And I can't help but reflect on people who are just trying to get on with their everyday lives that are probably experiencing hanger. And I'm like, they're going to be happier and more productive if we can feed them. So let's just focus on doing that. And I think the sky would be the limit for our country. I believe very deeply in the potential of Australia. I think we're an extraordinary nation who has undersold itself so frequently. You know, we're the middle of the road. We're almost like the middle child in terms of global politics. We just don't like to be the leader. We're not going to be last. But there are so many places we could be leading the world, whether it's on the energy transition, whether it's on housing and social justice. But I do think in this place, in how do you feed a population fairly, that would be an amazing thing to be able to crack. So I'm keen. I'm happy to be able to step in and play whatever role I can in this space.
Well, Kylie, I hope you put yourself out of a job. What do you like to eat? Like, what's a great meal for you?
Look, I think it depends on the day, to be honest. So, being in Parliament, this is probably a bad kind of admission, but actually my eating habits in the last 4 years have been appalling, because you just eat when you can. I'm a constantly on the run eater. But I've got to say, my best meals are the meals I have with my kids. As I said, I have 3 children who are all young adults now. And for me, food has always been about connection. I hate following recipes. Don't ever ask me to cook something off a page. But I love creating stuff with my family and then sitting down to eat that. I'm probably, at my heart though, I'm a really traditional, eater. I like nothing more than, a roast dinner with my kids, or, something just simple that just creates space for you to be able to sit down and be together and to listen to each other. So if I could live on any cooking for the rest of my life, it would be my mother's cooking. But, I know that is a chapter in your lives that you move through too. So, I will eat anything except artichokes. Don't put an artichoke in front of me.
Oh, there's a challenge to find the most delicious artichoke dish and put it in front of you, Kylie. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your knowledge and your energy today. Thanks for the work you're doing and about to do. And I look forward to seeing the ripples of change.
Look, thank you so much for having me, and I want to thank you for doing what you do. I mean, these conversations are so important, and I want to thank your listeners for tuning in, because an informed community is able to move together so much further. So, I'm just a cog, very small cog in what is this extraordinary wheel. So thanks for having me at your table.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you, Kylie. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This